The topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the host and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Geeks, Geezers, and Googleization Show, the home of Googleization Nation, where we talk with HR and business thought leaders about the crazy shift going on in the world of business, technology, and HR. Here's your host, Ira Wolf, and co-host Keith Campagna.
Hey, welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Geeks, Geezers, and Googleization and Googleization Nation. Let me start out by just saying that Keith and I hope that all our listeners, and again, we've got a growing audience, loyal people. I keep getting more and more comments of people who heard us and or someone shared an episode. But we really do hope that everyone is safe and healthy in the new normal, which seems to, every day is a new normal. So I'm not sure how normal it is, but things are moving fast. And, as you've heard me say, I talk about the shift. The shift got really very real this week. And from all indications, it's going to get more real or unreal in the coming weeks. I told somebody this morning, I said, it sort of feels like I was at a doctor's appointment, and I said, it's sort of was actually just a checkup. So I'm doing fine. But I said to somebody, it feels like we're all sort of actors in somebody else's play, sort of coming out of a movie, about, one of these crises that certainly there's been their share of them over the last 30 or 40 years, these catastrophic movies. But it all seems that we're sort of actors and trying to figure our way about. And in part of that, I do hope that the Geeks, Geezers, and Googleization Show, and then also the community Googleization Nation, is a safe place for everybody to come. I mean, it's free. You can join it. You go to GoogleizationNation.com. Or you can actually text to 64600 and text G Nation, G as in Google, G Nation, 6400. And again, you'll get updates about podcasts like this. We've got a bunch of live streams starting to interview quite a few people on nobody really has the answers. But trying to get advice and recommendations and ideas. And there's so many good things coming out. I've spent the last few weeks, the last few days, not the last few weeks, but especially the last few days, really attending a couple summits, participating in some meetups that are going on, a lot of experts, listening to a lot of organizations and companies. It's overwhelming. I mean, part of it's overwhelming because there's so much information out there. And truth be told, it's not all bad. I mean, there's a lot of people that are coming up with new ways, creative ways, positive ways to get through this. It just seems that, every day that there's a new twist on it. But everybody's pretty confident that at some point, those who do it right, those who try, those who listen, who learn and figure out ways to adapt, are going to come out of this way ahead. A lot of new opportunities, and especially looking at health. How we take care of people and how we manage people, but also healthcare and education. A lot of things that we talked about, the tipping point, that shift. My subtitle on my book is "When the Shift Hit Your Plan." Well, the shift hit everybody's plan. And that was sort of what the kick in the butt everyone was looking for, just figure out ways that we can continue to move forward. So, again, we hope this is a kind of a safe environment where you can learn a lot, but you can also challenge us and you can challenge our guests and ask a lot of questions. But we're continuing to move forward, and hopefully will be a real viable sense of information that you've got, which also leads to what one of the things we're going to be talking about today is the remote workforce. People, we talked about maybe 1 out of 5 people were telecommuting before, and some of those weren't doing it on an everyday basis. But all of a sudden, is everybody almost every worker is remote, or a significant portion of the population of the workforce is now remote. And we got a great guest, Phil Strazzulla. Phil was with us, and we'll bring him on in a minute. But Phil was with us almost a year and a half ago. He was one of our early guests, and we were talking about a number of things. I've interviewed Phil for my video, on a live stream, and so you can catch that. I think we did that back in maybe November or December. But we scheduled Phil to talk a little bit about video interviewing, having no idea how relevant it was going to be. And so we're anxious to hear from Phil. Phil keeps track of what's going on in the tech space, a lot of this HR technology and HR software. And so he's got a pretty good read on how to, what employers should be looking for, and what are some of the best practices, what are some tips for job seekers and candidates and hiring managers. So really excited to get into that, so we'll get there shortly. But also to put things in perspective, Keith, you're in the heat of this. You've got life-work integration, and you're also doing ROI. What's happening with you?
It's interesting, Ira. The thing, first and foremost, just to kind of echo the sentiment here, everybody in the world now is connected with this unknowingness about what's to come, and, want to wish the best for everyone, and let's do our job to make this pandemic go away as fast as possible. And with that, Ira, the gist of what I'm seeing out there and the conversations I'm having have everything to do with solving a problem, right? And that's, as a sales guy, the job is always to figure out what problem is our buyer or our prospective client experiencing, and try to figure out the best course of action to solve that problem. And within the last, 10 business days, it seems as though the business world globally got a whole bunch of new problems to deal with. And if you think about the kind of work that Phil does and his team does over there, they're, using technology has never been more important as it will be going forward, because now it almost seems like the options are somewhat more realistic. I can't imagine how many people out of the workforce are now working from home, and I'm awfully curious to find out how many of them are going to go back. We talked about this a little bit last week, but when you think about how employee engagement and catering to a less of a work-life balance mindset, which is one or the other, but more of an integrated, if you don't mind me, plugging it a little bit here, like how do we integrate the professional component of our lives into the personal component of our lives and make life easier? And I think technology is the way to do that, right? So there's a whole lot of
technology is, but it's also our behaviors, it's our habits. and people were thrown into this. I was on 2 calls. Amazing. People are still going about their business. Yesterday, I had 3 calls. 2 of them are very likely to become clients. The other, I'm still evaluating. But the people are hiring. They're calling for testing. And again, in some industries, because there's some industries that are going to have to ramp up quickly, which is really where, the video interviewing and video conferencing and technology is going to help. But one of the challenges is, and I just read this morning, as I said, things keep happening fast. I read this in an article this morning, and it was a vice president of marketing. Now, he was working for a software company, but his comment was, and I'm really interested in getting Phil's feel for this too, is employees of all ages experience, this is a quote, employees of all ages experience a minimal learning curve, adapting to remote user-friendly digital tools. Now, he was referring to like Hangouts and Skype and Zoom. I've got it, I'm not as confident as he is. Not that it's a minimal learning curve, but it seems that a lot of people are challenged even with the simplest technology. Keith, you're out there in the field. You're working a lot with that, and then it'll be a good opportunity to bring in Phil on that. Am I just seeing the dark side of this, or are there a lot of people struggling with that people can use the tool until something doesn't work, or again, VPNs and internet, our bandwidth within companies is being challenged. But even if all that was working well, it seems that a lot of people are challenged by using some of this technology, and now we just threw them in the deep end of the pool without a lifesaver to figure it out. Is that true? I mean, are you seeing that?
Yeah, I'm
sorry,
optimistic. Oh, sorry. Let me, real quick, I'm optimistic with that one because change is here. And so people have less of an option of adopting. And yeah, there'll be that initial spike in terms of, IT department tickets being issued and people trying to figure out what to do next if something breaks, and frustration will probably peak at the beginning of all this. But I just think when all of that settles, there'll be a much more efficient, almost evolved workforce that's more connected than they've ever been.
Yeah.
Phil?
Yeah, Phil. Hey, and welcome, Phil. Phil Strazzulla from Select Software Reviews.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for having me back. It's fun to pick up the conversation despite everything that's kind of going on. I think, to your point, Ira, it's sort of the shift happens and you have to be ready and be nimble. And, one of the things that I think a lot of HR and recruiting leaders are trying to scramble and figure out are how do we shift to a remote workforce? How do we shift to remote hiring for a lot of our roles? And we want to keep those things going. To your guys' point, there's a lot of industries that are not going to slow down during this. Healthcare, a lot of financial services. Actually, I talked to a mortgage company yesterday that is busier than ever because rates are so low and people are refining at such a rapid rate. So there's all these shifts happening. And one thing that I think is actually pretty interesting is that, there's the tools that you need to do this stuff. I think that person's comment is right that the learning curve on a lot of these tools actually is really flat because they've just been so well designed. We've just gotten so good at building software over the last 20 or 30 years that a lot of people can just pick up stuff really intuitively. I think one of the biggest challenges for companies is actually the philosophy in which they use these tools. And what I mean by that is when you're not co-located in an office, there's lots of communication that doesn't happen explicitly or implicitly. There's lots of miscommunication that can happen. We've all, seen these studies about like how you should use emojis in your emails and stuff like that, because you can run the risk over digital communication of being very curt and being very rude with people. And so you have to have sort of an underlying philosophy that informs the tools that you use, but also more importantly, how you actually use them so that you can actually be effective.
So let's take a step back. And because we kind of literally just, we dove into the end of this because it's so, it's such a hot topic and so important. You guys are, I assume you're all working remote. I mean, you're a tech, you're a tech company. I know you had a place of business, but what are you using? I mean, how do you guys communicate? How are you, one is tell everybody what you do, but then how are you communicating? How are you managing a remote workforce?
Yeah, sure. So first off, kind of what Select Software does and maybe who I am. So I started my career off working in venture capital, doing early stage software investing into fast growing companies. Went to Harvard Business School, got my MBA, taught myself how to program, started a HR tech business, and then about a year ago started another business called Select Software, where we're basically trying to help HR and recruiting teams find and buy the right software through free online unbiased research that we do. So we spend all day long talking to practitioners, analysts, venture capitalists, anybody that we think is smart to understand, how is AI actually impacting recruiting processes? What are the best applicant tracking systems? There's 300 solutions out there. What are the ones people should actually focus on? etc. And then we try to write everything up into the most practical, easy to comprehend and consume content out there, so that when you're looking for a new solution or you've got a specific problem, you can save yourself a lot of time and research, and you can also make sure that you're going to actually partner with the right vendor.
Excellent. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, you know, in the before time, I sold HR tech, and it is incredibly beneficial for companies to understand and take a look at some of the stuff Phil and his team are doing over at Software Select Select Software, because there's so much noise, and the goal isn't just to buy software. The goal is to use the software as a means to an end, and if you want that end to be successful, there's no reason anymore for anyone in you know, talent acquisition or HR to have to reinvent the wheel, and it just makes life a whole lot easier by doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm looking at an article that was posted. Everybody can go up for it. We'll make sure that we post that when this goes to the podcast and on the website as well. But you can also just search for top 7 best video interviewing platforms, which we'll get to. It's on selectsoftwarereviews.com. Phil, I don't know if you did that purposely because we have the podcast, or whether that was in your plans before, but it was certainly appropriate. And we'll be talking about that in just a minute. But one of the things that that I want to make everybody aware of is we're already getting some comments, so appreciate it, and we'll get to those questions. We are live today, so if you do have a question, you can call in at 561-623-9429. That's 561-623-9429. Or just go to w4cy.com, and there's a live chat there, and submit your questions, and we will absolutely try to get to them. So, Phil, I mean, this fits in line with what we were just, kind of the trend and what we're headed with this before we get into some of your specific recommendations and best practice. Well, not your recommendations, because I know you want to be fair to everybody, but, some of the softwares that you've evaluated, and then what are some of the best practices that companies can look at. But before we get there, Lance had a really good question, and both your opinions on it. How do you feel this shift in working from home is going to affect workplace activity? I don't know if that's currently or in the future, but let's, your choice how you want to deal with that. So. Yeah,
I mean, I think activity is an interesting use of words. It can mean productivity. It can mean how people interact. I think that a lot of people are worried about productivity falling when people work from home. And I think that the common mantra around this is, well, that's ridiculous. Like, how do you know your employees in the office are actually performing and doing their job? However, what I will say is that the companies that do work from home the right way have done it gradually. They have a lot of best practices in place. And this is somewhat anecdotal, but I was talking to a friend of mine yesterday who runs HR at a 2,000 employee company that is really fast growing. It was about, 300 or 400 people this time last year. And what they've noticed amongst the people that they can track their productivity very closely, like salespeople, they've noticed that the productivity has dropped off a cliff on a per person basis. And that could be because people are freaking out and reading the news a lot. Mm-hmm. It could be any number of things. They're trying to take care of their personal finances. This isn't really like a pure play case study in what it's like to work from home. But I think it's those sort of time acute factors, but it's also just the fact that this company, in 1 week switched to a work from home first policy and probably didn't have like all the controls in place. And so I think if your activity definition is productivity, you're probably going to see it drop off a cliff, to be quite honest. And if you're talking about activity in terms of how people interact with each other, I think without the proper guidelines, it's going to be all over the place, and you're going to have a lot of employee relations issues when people are miscommunicating over email or not communicating enough or over communicating or whatever the case may be. And so it's really incumbent upon companies to very quickly ramp up and understand what the Zapiers and other work remotely companies have done so well in order to be successful.
Keith, what are your thoughts?
The part that I like the most about this is that I don't really see there being much of a choice. I think that there are going to be enough companies out there that will offer home working options because they've been able to accept that, albeit uncomfortable, they're gonna hire people that get the work done. And those organizations are going to attract the people that are disgruntled, that might not feel like their bosses or their employer trust them. And I think that we might be seeing that shift that we've been talking about for the last 18 months, where there's going to be a much more faster paced connection between people within departments, people on teams, and maybe even different relationships between the organizations that buy and sell products. I think we're going to see an enhanced connection take place.
Yeah, and Phil, I mean, again, I agree with you. I can see where productivity or activity fell off on a cliff. Because again, this happened overnight. I mean, people were told that, you're not coming back to work. We got shut down. There were government orders to, shelter in place in different places of the country. So, part of it is a lot of companies didn't have an infrastructure or the technology to be able to do this. They may have had it for a few clients, or for a few people. You can work from home 1 day a week, but that was select, and some people chose not to do it, or some people did choose to do it. All of a sudden, is 7 days a week you're home. The VPNs were crashing like crazy. I was on a call the other day, and that was the main issue. Is that people were at home, but they weren't able to gain access because their VPNs and their connections weren't there. There are tools like Hangout and Skype and Slack. Is super popular. It's amazing how many people, although they're fairly simple to use once you do it, really struggle. I mean, getting it set up, and then you also are dealing with what the capacity is at home. Not everybody is on a cable. I mean, there's still people on DSLs. Sometimes they're on the lowest package. They're on the plan. Their kids are playing. Now the kids are home at the same time. They're playing games. So there's so many variables that, again, I don't think anybody planned for. So I can see on the short term where workplace activity, where the activity and productivity goes down. But I don't think it's blaming it on the remote on the remote aspect. I think it's just it was not planned for, not anticipated for on this grand scale. And there's certainly some people that aren't prepared for it, but I think there's a combination of everything. And as more people get used to it and find their way about over a week or two, then I think you're going to see a rise in certainly in some areas. And if not, those companies may not be around for very long. If the employees aren't capable of getting their act together, and the companies aren't capable of getting their act together, then I'm not sure. I think there's probably a bright opportunity for a lot of companies, and some just may not make it.
Yeah. Phil, let me throw something out there to you before the break comes up here, and it gets here quick.
Sure.
The three of us kind of wax philosophy about this stuff all the time as it relates to technology and workforce management. And so I think that we have kind of a more rare perspective when it comes to this stuff. But have you seen over there on your side an uptick in interest in purchasing software? Are you seeing any kind of trends as it relates to organizations actually now taking the time to learn about what kind of decisions and what software to make?
You mean just in the last couple of days sort of thing?
Yeah, well, the last couple of days are probably an outlier. I'm just curious what the state of business looked like prior to this. Was there an increase already in the making, and now this just validates everybody's desire to learn more? Or is this really going to be the bull in the china shop?
Yeah, so I think the trend is definitely people being more and more thoughtful about the purchasing decisions that they make, because everybody's gotten burned. Everybody sort of understands this stuff's important. It's a lot of money. It's a lot of time. And they can be really hard solutions to rip and replace. In the last week, what I've seen is there's just a shift. So, my website is sort of like the go-to to learn about lots of different types of HR tech, recruiting, HR, payroll, whatever. And what I've seen is that, for example, the video interview category, the interest there is up about 6 or 7x over the last 3 weeks. And actually this week it's up like 3x from last week, which is insane. And the other categories they're basically flat. You know what I mean? Like, they're not down, but they're not up. But it's just that people's attention, because it's so important. If you got people in your hiring funnel, you got to keep them moving. How are you going to do that? Well, you can do FaceTime, maybe you can do Zoom, but really you're going to want to think about a dedicated video interview solution.
Makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So, hey, we are up against our break. So we're going to take our break. We're going to introduce our sponsors, Zor.ai and Success Performance Solutions. We want to thank both of them for helping us be on the air and allow us to have interviews like this. We're about a year and a half into this on W4CY.com, and we've had almost 70 interviews already. So appreciate them helping us be here. So we will be back in less than 2 minutes. Stay right where you are. Geeks, Geezers, and Googleization Show. We're with our guest, Phil Strazzulla.
Imagine how your company would grow if your candidate experience earned a 99% approval rating. Well, to get to 99%, you need the 3 best letters in recruitment technology, XOR. Zor's text bots, chat bots, and audio bots increased IKEA's candidate conversion rate 455%. Zor decreases candidate drop-off rates, improves your candidate experience, and collects analytics for future strategies. To learn more, check out Zor.ai. That's XOR.ai.
Hi everyone, this is Ira Wolf, author of Recruiting in the Age of Googleization. I'm excited to announce that my online course, Recruitment Marketing for the Accidental Recruiter, is open for business. This course is the culmination of a 2-year-long project and releases recruiting tips I've learned after hundreds of hours of research, speaking with thousands of conference attendees, and interviews with dozens of experts. It's all available to you in Recruitment Marketing for the Accidental Recruiter. To receive more information or get started, visit our website at www.successperformancesolutions.com and click on the tab Recruitment Marketing for the Accidental Recruiter. Hey, welcome back, everyone, to the Geeks, Geezers, and Googleization Show. I'm your host, Ira Wolf. I'm here with my co-host, Keith Campagna, and our guest today is Phil Strazzulla from Select Software Reviews. And we've been talking about all the changes that are going on, especially with remote work, what that's going to look like, how that's affecting productivity, how we'll get into a little bit what our forecast is going forward. But Phil, really appreciate you being here, and as I said, very timely. You just published a review of 7 or 8, I don't remember the exact number, of different video interviewing platforms. People can go up to the website selectsoftwarereviews.com and see it there. I don't want to get into any individual ones. However, what I'd like to do is talk about some of the best practices. So you were saying that traffic, I think, was up 6-fold last week for video interviewing, people looking at it. This week it's up another 3-fold. What are, you do a really nice outline of what the companies are, but what are some of the things that if I'm an employer, I'm saying now's the time to do it. It's been on our table. We've just postponed it. We kept putting it off, but we've got to do it right now. We're looking for a video platform. What are some of the things, what are some of the steps that a company should go through? And Keith, we'll get your input on it too, as far as evaluating the ROI on it. So Phil.
Yeah, sure. So I think, in today's day and age, like most companies are probably thinking about this for the right reasons, which is we've got to keep our recruitment process going despite the inability to meet in person. And how do you actually do that? Well, there's really only one way, which is video interviews. And so it's all about understanding, I think, short and long term, how this is going to fit in. If this is like a very temporary thing and you're a smaller organization, you can probably get by with FaceTime or WhatsApp video chat or whatever your sort of like preferred method of one-to-one video conversation is. If you're thinking about this more from a long-term perspective, maybe you're like, hey, this COVID-19 thing is probably going to go on for a while. Or, you know what, this is actually a real time saver for us. It allows us to interview more people. For high volume hiring, video interviews have been shown to increase the show rate for interviews tremendously because people don't have to actually go somewhere to go to an interview. This is stuff like, retail, et cetera. Then video interviewing can be a great thing for you. And it's all about understanding how it fits into your existing recruiting process and therefore what sort of vendors you want to partner with. And again, I think if you're a small company, if you're like a 20 or 30 person company and you've already got a subscription to Zoom or you just want to use something super cheap, like I think you can get away with FaceTime or whatever your existing video conference solution is. And then for most companies that have like a real recruiting apparatus, you're probably going to want to buy something that is specific to video interviewing, that integrates with your applicant tracking system, that has scheduling built in, that has a lot of employer branding capabilities, and all that good stuff.
So that's sort of, that leads into the question because, again, we've got a lot of small organizations or maybe people, especially now don't have a budget to invest in it. So, Zoom is an enormously popular package. There's a lot of other ones that are starting to come out. What's the difference? Why would somebody choose a video interviewing package like that you talked about on the website versus just saying, hey, let's go with Zoom, let's go with Skype, let's go with FaceTime?
Yeah, so it's kind of funny because somebody from Harvard, of all places, emailed me this exact question yesterday in response to some of the content we put out. And my response was that
you made me feel smart.
Exactly. Yeah, there you go. It's almost like you're an alumni. So I think like the video interview packages have a few bells and whistles that actually make them worth the incremental investment. So one, it's going to integrate with your applicant tracking system, so your recruiters don't have to go and use another system. When somebody has moved to the right stage within your ATS, they're automatically going to get a link sent out to schedule a video interview. You can see the results and do all that jazz directly from the ATS. And that's huge because the login fatigue is really big, especially in the recruiter world. And so if you want to have the usage, that's important. Two is scheduling. So interviews get rescheduled all the time. There are busy people on both ends of that camera. And so that sort of, AI-ish scheduling capability is big. The video interview platforms have on-demand capabilities. You can send people questions that they answer in their own time, and then you can review those questions. There's some compliance stuff as well built into these platforms. There's employer branding aspects where you can, with your emails that you send to people, you can set the right expectations. You can have a pre-roll, essentially advertisement talking about your company. There's just lots and lots of little features that make this a much better platform than Zoom or Skype. And so if you're going to be hiring more than 10 people a year and you're going to use video interviews, it almost always makes sense to go with one of these platforms.
Yeah, even for a small company, and again, I work with a lot of medium, small businesses. Even last week is probably the last one for a while. I presented at a local SHRM chapter, and it was about more on recruitment. And I had everybody, I said, how many people are using technology? And then I flipped the question and asked how many people were actually still using spreadsheets for their payroll.
Yeah.
And
oh God.
What was that answer like, by the way? Ira?
Ira, how many people are still using spreadsheets?
There was probably about 8 or 9 hands that went up out of about 75. Yeah, I mean, it was way too many. It was
10%.
way too many. Yeah.
Hey Phil, I'm gonna be guilty of the old adage, when you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? Since you last came on the show, I joined a startup company. You know, we've talked about how the ROI shop helps build value calculators so that you could quantify the business value of buying a product or a software or a service. With the way that the economy and the momentum of the business world has essentially come to a screaming halt, in my mind, once everything starts to pick up, the CFOs and the controllers inside of organizations aren't exactly going to be handing out purchase orders. How can somebody in human resources validate, or talent acquisition, what are some of the ways that software like video interviewing software can make an impact so that the CFO can have confidence in putting limited company resources into new technology like this?
Yeah, I think there's 3 main ways that I would quantify the ROI. We actually have an ROI calculator that goes into one of these on the website, like a spreadsheet you can download, make it bespoke for your company. But basically, I think one of the big ways is through on-demand recruiting. You can have candidates answer a bunch of questions, and we all know, anybody who's interviewed anybody, within 3 to 5 minutes, you kind of understand whether or not you want to move somebody forward. And so if you've got somebody answering 3 or 4 questions, you can spend 5 minutes vetting them and understanding if you want to move them forward or not, versus doing a 45-minute phone screen. And it's very simple to multiply that math out and be like, all right, we need, let's say, 15 phone screens for every hire that we make. And so each of those phone screens used to be an hour. Now they're 5 minutes. We're basically saving 15 hours per hire. Our recruiters make, let's say, $70 an hour. So 15 times 70, that's like $1,300. So we're saving $1,300 per hire. That feels pretty good. So that's one really interesting way, I think, to quantify the impact of video interviewing. I think in like the COVID-19 era, what it's actually doing is it's allowing you to hire. It's almost like a binary thing where if you don't have this, you're not going to make the hire. So I was talking to 3 different friends last week, and each of them are in interview processes, and almost none of the companies that they're interviewing with have communicated with them about next steps. They've all basically just like gone dark, and it's probably because those recruiting teams are scrambling. They're trying to figure out like, okay, what do we do? When are we going to reopen the office? Blah, blah, blah. And the very few companies, like I think 2 of the companies that each of these people were interviewing with collectively, have actually been like, okay, here's the deal. Like, we don't really know what's going on. We're going to schedule a video interview with you next week. We're going to keep the process moving. Each of these people are going to make $200K plus. And so the cost per hire on somebody like that is really, really, really high. And so if you can save like 1 or 2 recruiter fees by hiring somebody that came through inbound just because you have a better candidate experience, you're going to make a lot of money. Like each of those people is $40K saved in a recruiter fee. So that's another way I would quantify it. And the last way is for high volume hiring. So the exact opposite end of the spectrum, people making maybe $15 an hour, they're doing retail jobs. These folks have a no-show rate for interviews. Anybody who's ever hired people for warehouses, for retail, et cetera, knows that a lot of people don't show up for interviews. And when you do it through video interview, it just makes it much more accessible. Somebody doesn't have to take the day off. They don't have to get childcare. They can just show up for the interview for 30 minutes online. They can meet all the people that they need to. On the hiring end of the spectrum, they can just pass around an iPad. You spend 15 minutes with each of the people on the floor. and then you get a go, no-go decision really quickly. And so if you increase the show, no-show rate by 30% and you multiply that throughout your hiring funnel, again, like let's say we need X amount of people to do interviews to get Y amount of hires, we increase X by 30%, that's going to decrease our overall cost per hire. It's also going to decrease our time to fill, which allows us to better service our customers and stuff like that. So there's lots of different ways to tackle it. It depends on your company. It depends on if you're thinking about it just for right now during COVID-19 or if you're thinking about it long term. But without a doubt, there is an ROI for video interviewing platforms.
I love those answers. And Ira, and Phil, I'll expect that you, as a former guest and now two-time guest, you listen to every one of our podcasts almost religiously. But in the event you missed us a few weeks ago, we had Kevin Grossman and Jerry Crispin on talking about the candidate experience and how mind-blowing the statistics are as it relates to your good old-fashioned nobody ever gets in touch with the candidate during the process. And something you had mentioned kind of triggered my memory, thinking that if through the video conferencing software, you're able to communicate or at least make it that much easier where a recruiter can then say, sorry, there's not a good match right now. Because they have all this freed up time, it almost seems like there's that residual benefit, because not only were you able to streamline the process, not only were you able to increase the value of the recruiter's time, you're able to do things with that extra time.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah. So as you're both talking, one of the things that, as I mentioned earlier, that I was busy yesterday. I mean, totally unexpected getting 3 incoming calls that were looking, that they were hiring. One was in sales, but one was in sales. They're in the construction business, and they're expecting an uptick, not for new construction, but for remodeling and problems. And, even in Salt Lake City, right before we went on, I think there was an earthquake out there. So there are some industries that you're still going to need workers to be able to go out there, and they need to interview on the fly. But healthcare, and distribution and transportation, they're all industries that are ramping up big time for logistics, getting supplies, having providers. They're not prepared for this. I mean, especially in healthcare. I mean, it's been a notoriously slow industry at adoption, not from a technology standpoint, but especially, from a technology, not from the clinical side, but from the people management side. And so there are some immediate opportunities with companies that I can see that they, we're video interviewing, whether it is, as simple as FaceTime or whether it's looking at a bigger application like you were talking about, Phil, some immediate needs there. And afterwards, again, I think people are, which leads into a question here, and I'd like your opinion on it from one of the other, from Jeff, who sent it in, is where do you think this is going afterwards? Here's my opinion, and you can disagree or agree with it, and then kind of fill in the blanks there. I think that because this isn't going to be like a 1 week home. This isn't like a hurricane where we're asking everybody to stay home for a week and then come back in the office. They're talking anywhere from, I don't think the 2 week minimums are going to go, but 4 weeks, 6 weeks. Now they're talking even 6 months that people are going to be at home. People are going to get used to working at home. I mean, they're going to change their lifestyle. They don't have to commute. They may want to go into the office to see people every once in a while. But what's your feeling? Is this going to be the tipping point where telecommuting and remote work goes over the top, and therefore, whether it's video interviewing or video conferencing or video meeting, a lot more is going to be done online? I'll throw that out to each of you.
So I personally think that if this goes on for more than 6 months and companies iron out the kinks, that it could be the dawn of 2 or 3x more people working from home, working remotely. I think if it just lasts a month or two, it's actually going to have the exact opposite effect, because companies just weren't prepared for this. And I'm hearing a lot of stuff is just breaking, communications, people's workplace relationships, productivity. And so I think it's actually going to be a thing where people are like, oh my gosh, that was such a disaster. Like, why would we ever do that again, sort of thing. I also think that, there are a lot of people that love working from home. I'm one of them. And I look at, a lot of my friends are like, this is terrible. Like, I like going to the office. I've got friends in the office. I like going to the office gym and sort of my whole routine. So there's actually a large segment of the population that enjoys that ritual more than the ritual of being cooped up in the same place where they spend the rest of their lives. And again, all this stuff is in the context of, I can't leave, I can't go to a restaurant, there's all this extra stress, I'm worried about my stock portfolio, blah, blah, blah. We weren't prepared for it. But I think people might just remember working from home is not the best from both the employee and the HR perspective.
Interesting. Keith, what do you think?
I think that everyone's going to have to wait to next week because we're running out of time here, and I want to leave time for Phil to plug plug, share. I know the website Select Software Reviews with an S.com. Phil, any other places, any other ways people could get a hold of you?
No, that's the best place to look me up, or LinkedIn or whatever social media.
Yeah. All right, cool. And now just, for the record, there's a whole bunch of other, software types that Phil's team vets and reviews, and it's all on the website. So it's not just about video conferencing. I'm sure that if this conversation caught your attention out there, there's plenty of information that might be able to help you with things outside of video conferencing as well. Ira, what are your thoughts about all the shift hitting the plan?
Well, it's evolving even faster than I can keep up with. Even with what Phil was saying, as far as we'll after, if this only lasts a month or two. The challenge with after a month or two is that schools are still out. I mean, people can't revert, go back to the way it was real quick. And then the supply chain is going to be disrupted. So, I mean, I just think it's going to last longer than 2 or 3 months. But I think technology, I believe, is that technology is just going to be a bigger and bigger part of work. And it's going to change. What does, I wrote in my book that people don't go to work anymore, are starting to not go to work anymore. And, so I think that there's going to be a lot, there'll be a blend. But I think there's going to be a lot more people that do work from home on a regular basis. So that's my take. Phil, hey, thank you. It was, as I said, apparently a pertinent topic. A lot more questions. People have them. I know they can reach out to you and go to select softwarereviews.com or check with Phil Strazzulla on LinkedIn. I know he's always responsive that way. I want to thank everybody for listening to Geeks, Geezers, and Googlization Show again. Again, very tough times, very challenging times, but there's a lot of good things that are happening. So I hope you'll stay tuned and join Googlization Nation for some updates about shows. We got a couple live streams coming up next week. Keith, I think you're one of them. We're going to be talking about that. Yeah, Monday. We'll get out that time. Planning some webinars that we're doing, and I have got a ton of resources, things I read, articles, information, recommendations from people, not only involving around work, but a lot of people are struggling with how do they keep their kids entertained at home during this crisis? Not entertained, but how do they educate them? And there's entrepreneurship at its best. There's a whole lot of new sites that are very educational focused, and we'll be posting them in there as well. Remember that my book, Recruiting in the Age of Googlization 2.0, is still available for free. You can go to join.googlizationnation.com. Keith and I are always interested in what you're hearing. Thanks to Lance and Jeff for the comments and a few other people that we weren't able to get to. We will get to them later. Thanks again to Zor.ai and Success Performance Solutions for helping us be on the air. So next week, 1 p.m., Wednesday, Eastern Time on W4CY.com, or you can catch us on any of your favorite podcasts, Spotify, Apple, Google, iHeart, you name it. we're there, and you can go to geeksgeezersgoogleization.com. So until next week, don't let the shift hit your plans.